Yesterday, Google's stock price cratered when it came to light that Gemini, its AI product, was generating images that were wildly off base. And this is probably one of the more interesting business stories of the last year. I want to dive deep into it on three different levels. One is on the programming of the AI itself and what the heck is going on there. Second is the programming of the incentives of Google's own employees. And third is the programming of the incentives of the corporations and their top management themselves. And I'll tell you what I mean, because all three are critical to understand what's really going on here. Let's talk about the AI itself. Here's what happened. When you went into Gemini and asked, show me some images of our founding fathers, a curious result kept popping up. The founding fathers weren't white, they were black, which there's nothing wrong with being black or white, of course, but one is factually correct and one isn't. And the AI was persistent in its biases across a wider range of categories. What did this reveal? The AI just reflects the biases of its human creators. See, the thing about AI is it's generative. It creates new content that even the human beings didn't directly create using a computer. That's what makes AI different from prior forms of human-operated technology. But that AI, still in its very DNA, almost the way that it thinks, is programmed by the very biases that its creators infuse into it. Now, what you've learned then is that the biases infused into that AI are none other than the cultural orthodoxy that pervades the rest of Silicon Valley, of the modern woke orthodoxy, taught to apologize for our nation's founding. Systemic racism, starting in 1619, not 1776. You've heard the whole 9 yards. But now that woke bias isn't just something reserved for a DEI training session in the HR department, but is reflected in the very content that the engineers themselves are creating, the very algorithms they're writing, that are programming the AI that'll write the history books of the future. Now, how were those employees themselves programmed to behave that way? That's by a set of incentives created around them. This is the second layer here. Programming of the AI's creators themselves. Take what happened to James Damore at Google, that very company. What did he do? He had the gall to speak up at Google at an open forum that they hosted, a chat forum that they have, where he offered an alternative hypothesis for why there were fewer women than men in engineering profession. And he said it might reflect a divergence of interests or conditioning at an earlier and younger age. For this, he was excoriated. To say it was anything other than discrimination was outside of the Overton window of what you could say. He was fired. And so the message that sends to other employees at Google and across Silicon Valley is that if you don't toe the line of this new woke orthodoxy, you're told to shut up, sit down, and do as you're told. And if you fail to do that, then you're going to be fired and face personal financial consequences and reputational consequences as a result. Well, that stops the culture of actual open debate that allows us to create better products in the first place. So my bet is many of those engineers who were working on Gemini knew that they were creating a biased product, a product that was going to actually create a life of its own and get people to wrong answers. But they were afraid to say anything about it because they had already been programmed by the incentives that Google had created in its corporate environment, signaling that if you did speak up about that mistake in the product, and it was a mistake, that you would face the same fate that James Damore did. So that's the second layer of programming with incentives. But there's a third and higher layer of programming using capital itself that causes companies across corporate America to behave the way that they are. It's not just Google. Look at what Anheuser-Busch did with its disastrous marketing campaign, pushing this transgenderism agenda, catering to a fringe minority, but that caused its own stock price to crater, not just as a one-time event, but Anheuser-Busch really hasn't recovered since the disaster of that Dylan Mulvaney experiment and the transgender ideology that they tried to push. You could argue there's even a similar lesson to be learned by Boeing, which, for all of its DEI policies, didn't do much to prevent its own planes from actually operating at a high quality when you have doors flying off the 737 MAX in the middle of the sky. The list goes on. But who's programming these companies to behave that way? Those are the asset managers, the financial institutions that invest your money across the public companies in corporate America. What they're doing is using your money to effectively vote for policies in all of these companies' boardrooms that advance social agendas instead of product excellence, be it product excellence for Gemini or for Budweiser or Anheuser-Busch or arguably even Boeing. BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard managing 20 some odd trillion dollars, voting for racial equity audits in Apple's boardroom, as you saw with BlackRock and State Street a couple of years ago. voting for Scope 3 emissions caps with Chevron, in the case of BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard several years ago, that don't advance these companies' best interests, but which do advance one-sided orthodoxies that government actors in turn are pushing BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard to pursue. So pull that string all the way up the chain. You see the AI reflects the biases of its programmers, the human beings who are the employees of these companies. They themselves are programmed by the employee incentive that those companies create in their corporate culture, who are themselves programmed by the actual asset managers that are infusing capital into these companies, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, who themselves are programmed, of course, by government actors, where a lot of this begins. It's not the invisible hand of the market. It's the invisible fist of progressive government behind this entire phenomenon. Well, the lesson is Google learned that lesson yesterday when its share price cratered. You'd hope that Anheuser-Busch learned it with its damaged share price as well. Focus on product excellence. Focus on excellence, period, over social and political agendas. That's the way forward for corporate America. For my part, I'm proud to have written 2 books on this a couple of years ago, and I also founded Strive Asset Management to compete directly against the likes of BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard, which says that not all solutions are just going to be delivered through the government. A lot of this is going to have to be driven intellectually through our culture and also through private market action as well. And if we're going to get our country back, that's how. And hopefully that serves as a wake-up call to these companies to say that, you know what, the woke orthodoxies and the DEI and the ESG agendas, that's the way of the past. Excellence is the way of the future.